I want to talk about something we don't like to talk about, something that makes us shift in our seats, avoid eye contact, maybe even chuckle nervously. Loneliness. Not the kind you experience in a crowded room, not the kind you feel after a breakup. I'm talking about the kind that sneaks in when you realize you have no real friends, no one to call when life gets heavy, no one who truly sees you. And let's be real, this isn't just sad, it's dangerous. Studies show that loneliness has the same impact on our bodies as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let that sink in. But here's the kicker. It's not just happening to the elderly or the isolated. It's happening to successful, competent, amazing women. Women who lead, who care for others, who are juggling all the things, except deep, meaningful connection. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we learned that being strong meant being self-sufficient. That vulnerability is a liability, that needing people makes us weak. That is a lie. The truth, we are wired for connection. It is in our biology. When we deny it, we suffer. So if you're that woman, the one who feels unseen, unheard, disconnected, I want you to hear this. It's not too late. You are not broken, but you have to be brave. Brave enough to reach out, to go first, to risk rejection, to say, hey, I need a friend. Because at the end of the day, real connection isn't about perfection. It's about showing up as you are and letting others do the same. So let's stop wearing loneliness like some secret shame. Let's call it what it is and do the work to change it. Because we are not meant to do this life alone. We don't talk about loneliness enough. We talk about hustle. We talk about success. We talk about being strong, independent women. But loneliness, that's not a headline we like to put on our lives. Because loneliness carries shame. It makes us feel like we failed in some way, like we're not lovable, like we're the only ones feeling this way. But let me be clear, loneliness isn't a personal failing. It's a crisis, one that's affecting millions of women every single day. And the worst part, it thrives in silence. I've spent decades studying human connection, and here's what I know for sure. Loneliness isn't just about being alone. You can be lonely in a marriage. You can be lonely in a workplace. You can be lonely while sitting at brunch with a group of women you call friends. Loneliness is not about proximity. It's about the absence of real, meaningful connection. It's about feeling unseen, unheard, and unimportant. And when that feeling lingers, it doesn't just hurt emotionally. It starts to shape our very sense of self-worth. Here's the scary part. Loneliness isn't just an emotional experience, it's a physical one. Studies show that chronic loneliness is as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15. Just sit with that for a second. It increases our risk of heart disease, dementia, depression, anxiety, and even premature death. Loneliness is not just about feeling sad on a Saturday night. It's about what happens when our nervous system exists in a constant state of stress, when we lack the social bonds that regulate our emotions, when our body perceives isolation as a threat to survival, because that's exactly what it is. And yet, we don't treat loneliness with the urgency it deserves. We don't talk about it the way we talk about heart disease or diabetes. There are no awareness campaigns, no annual checkups where your doctor asks, "How's your social health?" Instead, we downplay it. We tell ourselves we're just too busy for friendships. We convince ourselves we're fine. We post a happy selfie. We throw ourselves into work. We pour all our energy into caring for others, our kids, our partners, our careers, while ignoring the deep unmet need within ourselves. The truth is, we weren't meant to live this way. Human beings are hardwired for connection. From the moment we're born, our brains are designed to seek out relationships, to form attachments, to belong. Loneliness isn't just painful, it's unnatural. It goes against our biology. And yet, somewhere along the way, we started glorifying independence over interdependence. We started believing that needing people made us weak, that asking for support was some kind of failure. But nothing could be further from the truth. Connection isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. If you've ever felt lonely, you are not alone. And let me say that again, because loneliness can be so isolating that it convinces us we're the only ones experiencing it. You are not alone. Right now, in this very moment, there are millions of women who feel exactly like you do. Women who cry in their cars before going into the grocery store. Women who scroll through their phones wondering why no one is reaching out. Women who look at their own lives and think, how did I get here? This isn't just your experience. It's a global reality. And acknowledging that is the first step to changing it. But here's the thing. Loneliness doesn't just disappear on its own. It doesn't fix itself with time. If we don't face it, it festers. It turns into resentment, into self-doubt, into a belief that we're unworthy of connection. And that's when we stop trying. We stop texting first. We stop accepting invitations. We retreat further into isolation, thinking it's better to avoid rejection than to risk putting ourselves out there. But the truth is, the longer we stay in that place, the harder it becomes to get out. Loneliness is a silent epidemic, but it doesn't have to be a permanent one. It begins with recognizing that this isn't just happening to you, it's happening to all of us. And if we're going to break the cycle, we have to be willing to name it, to talk about it, to challenge the belief that independence is the highest form of strength. Because real strength is saying, I need people. Real strength is reaching out even when it feels vulnerable. Real strength is understanding that connection isn't just something we want, it's something we need to survive. We don't expect successful women to be lonely. That's the narrative we've built in our culture. If you have a thriving career, a family, a busy social calendar, then loneliness shouldn't be part of the equation. We assume that achievement and companionship go hand in hand, that success naturally brings connection. But the truth? Some of the loneliest women I've ever met are also the most accomplished. They are leaders, executives, caregivers, and high achievers. They're running businesses, raising families, showing up for everyone except themselves. They have people all around them, but when it comes to deep, meaningful friendships, that space is empty. And here's why. Success often comes at a cost. As women, we've been conditioned to believe that in order to have it all, we have to do it all. We grind, we prove, we hustle. We prioritize efficiency, productivity, and results. But what gets lost in that pursuit? Connection. Somewhere along the way, the long coffee dates with friends turned into rushed texts. The deep conversations got replaced by networking events. The friendships that once felt effortless now feel like just another item on the to-do list. And eventually, without even realizing it, we wake up one day and realize we have no one to call. The irony is that people on the outside don't see this struggle. From the outside, a successful woman looks like she has it all together. She's the one others go to for advice, for guidance, for help. And when you're that woman, the one who's always showing up for others, people assume you don't need anything in return. They don't check in because they think you're fine. They don't ask how you're really doing because you seem like the strong one. And the more this happens, the more isolated you become. Not because people don't care, but because they believe the version of you that's always got it handled. Let's talk about another piece of this, the guilt. Because when successful women do start to feel lonely, there's often a voice in their head that says, "You should be grateful. You have a great life. You don't get to complain about this." And so instead of acknowledging the loneliness, they push it down. They tell themselves they're being dramatic, that they just need to focus on work or make more time for their family. But gratitude and loneliness can exist at the same time. You can love your job, love your family, love your life, and still feel deeply disconnected. One doesn't cancel out the other. And let's be honest, friendship in adulthood is hard. When we were kids, making friends was effortless. It was built into our daily lives. We had recess, play dates, summer camps. We didn't have to schedule time for a connection. It just happened. But as we get older, friendships require effort. And when life gets busy, it's easy to let that effort slide. We assume our old friendships will always be there. We tell ourselves we'll make new friends when things settle down, but things don't settle down. There's always another deadline, another commitment, another responsibility that takes priority. And before we know it, years have passed, and the friendships we thought would last forever feel like distant memories. Here's the hardest part. Admitting this kind of loneliness can feel shameful. When we think about loneliness, we picture someone who is visibly alone, someone who has no social life, no family, no community. But that's not always what loneliness looks like. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting in a meeting room, surrounded by colleagues, but feeling completely unseen. Sometimes it looks like a mom at a birthday party, smiling for the photos, but feeling like she has no one to truly confide in. Sometimes it looks like scrolling through Instagram, seeing all the group trips, the girls' nights, the deep friendships, and wondering, when did I stop having that? So if you're that woman, the one who is accomplished, capable, and completely alone, I want you to know this. You are not broken. There is nothing wrong with you. You haven't failed at friendship. You have simply been doing what so many of us do, prioritizing everything but connection. And now it's time to change that. Human beings are not meant to do life alone. It's not just a nice idea. It's a biological fact. From the moment we're born, our brains are wired to seek out relationships. Infants don't just crave connection. They need it to survive. And that need doesn't disappear as we get older. The human nervous system is built for attachment, for belonging, for community. When we are connected to others in a meaningful way, our bodies release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which regulates stress and promotes well-being. When we are disconnected, our bodies go into survival mode, producing more cortisol, the stress hormone, which over time wreaks havoc on our mental and physical health. Loneliness doesn't just feel bad, it hurts us on a cellular level. But here's where things get complicated. Even though we are wired for connection, we live in a culture that prioritizes independence over interdependence. We celebrate self-sufficiency. We glorify the woman who does it all on her own, who never asks for help, who is strong enough to handle whatever life throws at her without leaning on anyone. And somewhere along the way, we started to believe that needing connection made us weak, that admitting loneliness was an admission of failure, that being vulnerable enough to say, I need people, was something to be ashamed of. But let me tell you, the strongest people I know are the ones who are deeply connected to others, because real strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing that you don't have to. The research is clear. Social connection is one of the biggest predictors of health and happiness. People who have close, supportive relationships live longer, experience less stress, and recover more quickly from illness. Studies even show that strong social ties can be more important to longevity than exercise or diet. Think about that for a second. We spend so much time trying to eat the right foods, follow the right fitness routine, do all the things to stay healthy, but the truth is, having deep, meaningful relationships is just as crucial, if not more. Loneliness, on the other hand, has been linked to higher rates of heart disease, depression, anxiety, and even early death. The science is undeniable. Connection is not just something we want, it's something we need to thrive. And yet, despite knowing this, so many of us still struggle to prioritize connection. We tell ourselves we're too busy to nurture our friendships. We get caught up in the daily grind, convincing ourselves that our careers, our families, our responsibilities should always come first. But what happens when we neglect our need for connection? We start feeling restless, numb, disconnected. We scroll through social media, watching other people's friendships play out in curated posts, while we sit alone wondering why we don't have that in our own lives. We distract ourselves with work, with Netflix, with endless to-do lists, but underneath it all, there's that nagging feeling. Something is missing, and what's missing is real, human connection, the kind that can't be replaced by productivity or success. One of the biggest myths about connection is that it happens naturally, that it should be effortless, that if we don't have strong friendships as adults, it must mean we're not likable or that something is wrong with us. But that's simply not true. Connection requires effort. It requires showing up. It requires reaching out, even when it feels awkward or uncomfortable. It requires making time, even when life feels overwhelmingly busy. Because the reality is, meaningful relationships don't just happen, they are built through intentionality, through vulnerability, through the willingness to invest in people, even when it would be easier to retreat into isolation. And let's talk about vulnerability for a second, because it's the foundation of real connection. Too many of us walk around wearing emotional armor, afraid to let people see our struggles, our fears, our insecurities. We keep conversations surface level. We hide behind busyness. We tell ourselves, we don't really need close friendships. But connection isn't built through perfection. It's built through honesty, through the moments where we admit, hey, I'm struggling right now, or I feel really lonely and I don't know how to change it. Those moments of raw, unfiltered truth, that's where real connection happens. Because when we allow ourselves to be seen, not just the polished, curated version of ourselves, but the real, messy, imperfect version, that's when other people feel safe enough to do the same. So if you've been feeling disconnected, if you've been telling yourself that friendships aren't that important or that you're fine on your own, I want you to challenge that belief, because isolation isn't strength. Independence at the expense of connection is not a badge of honor. We are wired for relationships. And when we deny that need, we are denying one of the most fundamental parts of what makes us human. We've been sold a lie, a big one, the kind that seeps into every part of our lives without us even realizing it. The lie is this: strong women don't need anyone. From the time we were little girls, we were told to be independent, to handle things on our own, to never rely on anyone else. We were taught that needing help is weakness, that asking for support is something to be ashamed of. And for so many of us, that message became a core part of who we are. We became women who pride ourselves on handling everything alone, who never ask for a hand, who push through exhaustion and stress without ever admitting we need someone to lean on. But here's the truth. That kind of self-sufficiency is a myth, and it's costing us more than we realize. Real strength has never been about doing everything alone. If you look at the most resilient people, the ones who thrive even in the hardest circumstances, they're not the ones who isolate themselves. They're the ones who ask for help. They're the ones who build deep supportive relationships, who lean on their friends, their family, their community. Because strength isn't about pretending you have it all together. Strength is about recognizing when you don't, and knowing that it's okay to need people. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to reach out and say, hey, I can't do this by myself. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. But for so many of us, admitting that feels impossible. We've built entire identities around being the ones who handle things, the ones who take care of everyone else, the ones who always have it together. And the more we reinforce that identity, the harder it becomes to step outside of it. Because what happens if we stop being the strong one? What happens if we let people see that we're struggling? Will they think less of us? Will they stop respecting us? Will they walk away? These fears, whether we say them out loud or not, are what keep us trapped in isolation. And the longer we stay in that cycle, the lonelier we become. The irony is, we don't judge other people for needing help. Think about it. If a friend came to you and said, I'm overwhelmed, I feel like I can't do this alone, would you think she was weak? Of course not. You'd tell her she doesn't have to do it alone. You'd remind her that she's human, that we all need support, that asking for help is normal. So why can't we extend that same grace to ourselves? Why do we hold ourselves to an impossible standard, one that tells us we have to be everything for everyone, but never expect anything in return? Let's be honest. Self-sufficiency feels safe. It gives us a sense of control. If we don't rely on anyone, we can't be disappointed. If we don't ask for help, we don't have to risk rejection. If we don't open up, we don't have to face the possibility that someone might not be there for us the way we hope. But here's the thing, avoiding vulnerability doesn't protect us. It isolates us. It keeps us from forming the deep, meaningful relationships that we're wired to need. It keeps us stuck in survival mode, constantly proving that we're fine when deep down we're anything but. And let's talk about the cost of all this, because when we buy into the myth of self-sufficiency, we don't just sacrifice connection, we sacrifice ourselves. We run ourselves into the ground trying to be everything for everyone. We burn out, we push through exhaustion, through stress, through loneliness, thinking that if we just keep going, we'll eventually feel okay, but we don't. Because we're not meant to live this way. Human beings need relationships. We need support. We need moments where we can fall apart and have someone say, I've got you. That's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of being human. So if you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, convincing yourself that you have to do it all alone, I want you to pause. Take a breath and ask yourself this. What would it look like if I let people in? Not just when it's convenient, not just when you've got everything under control, but in the messy, raw, vulnerable moments, because that's where real connection happens, and that's where true strength begins. Shame is a quiet, insidious force. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells us stories about ourselves that feel so real, so true, that we start believing them without question. And one of the biggest lies shame tells us is this: you're alone because you're not worthy of connection. Not because life got busy, not because friendships take effort, not because our culture has made it harder for adults to form meaningful relationships. No, shame tells us that if we're lonely, it must be because there's something wrong with us. And that belief, it's dangerous, because shame thrives in secrecy. The more we believe we're unworthy of friendship, the more we isolate ourselves. The more we isolate, the harder it becomes to reach out. And so the cycle deepens. We scroll through social media, seeing curated snapshots of friendships that seem effortless, joyful, unbreakable. And instead of recognizing that those images don't tell the whole story, we use them as evidence. See, everyone else has their people. I don't. That must mean something about me. But here's what I need you to understand. Loneliness is not a reflection of your worth. It is not proof that you are unlikable, or that you're too much or not enough, or that you're the only one who struggles with this. It is simply a reflection of a basic human need that has gone unmet. And the only way to break free from it is to challenge the shame that's keeping you stuck. The problem is, shame convinces us that we can't talk about our loneliness, that if we admit we don't have close friends, people will judge us, that if we tell someone we feel isolated, they'll pity us, or worse, they won't care. So instead of speaking up, we keep pretending. We act like we're fine. We stay busy. We work longer hours, take on more responsibilities, scroll through our phones instead of sending that vulnerable text. And all the while, shame gets stronger, feeding off our silence. But here's the truth. The moment we name our shame, it loses power. The moment we say out loud, I feel lonely, we crack the door open for connection. Because I promise you, if you say those words to the right person, they won't recoil. They won't look at you like you're broken. They'll exhale, maybe even smile, and say, me too. Because loneliness isn't just your experience. It's a human experience. And when we start talking about it, we realize we're not as alone as we think. So how do we push back against shame? We do the thing that feels impossible. We reach out before we feel ready. We take small, brave steps toward connection. We send the text, even if it feels awkward. We say yes to the coffee invite, even if we're out of practice at socializing. We stop waiting for someone else to make the first move. And when shame tells us they don't really want to hear from you, we recognize it for what it is, a lie. Because deep down, all of us are craving the same thing: to feel seen, to feel valued, to know that we matter to someone. Shame wants to keep you small. It wants you to believe that loneliness is your fault, but it's not. And the only way to escape its grip is to step directly into the thing it tells you to avoid: connection. Not perfect, effortless, movie-worthy friendships. Just real, messy, human connection. The kind that reminds you you are not alone. You never were. Let's get real. Friendship isn't just about having people to grab dinner with or text funny memes to. Real friendship, the kind that actually nourishes us, requires something deeper: vulnerability. And that's where a lot of us get stuck, because vulnerability is scary. It requires us to open up, to let people see parts of us that we might rather keep hidden. It means risking rejection, risking judgment, risking the possibility that we'll reach out and be met with silence. And for a lot of women, that risk feels too big. So instead, we keep things surface level. We stay in the safe zone where conversations are light, where we don't get too personal, where we don't let people in too far. And then we wonder why our friendships feel hollow. The truth is, you can't have deep, meaningful friendships without vulnerability. It's the foundation of real connection. Think about the people in your life you feel closest to. Are they the ones you've only ever shared good news with? The ones who have only seen the polished, put-together version of you? Or are they the ones who have seen you cry, who know your fears, your struggles, your moments of self-doubt? The ones who have sat with you in the messy, uncomfortable, raw moments of life? Because that's what deep friendship is. It's not just about celebrating the highs. It's about standing beside each other in the lows. But here's where it gets tricky. We can't expect vulnerability from others if we're not willing to offer it first. A lot of us want deep friendships, but we're waiting for the other person to go first. We want them to open up, to show their struggles, to prove that it's safe before we do the same. But someone has to take the first step. Someone has to say, I feel lonely, or I've been struggling lately, or I really value our friendship and want to make more time for it. And when we take that step, when we show up with honesty and authenticity, it gives the other person permission to do the same. That's how real connection starts. The problem is, many of us have been burned before. We've opened up only to be met with indifference. We've shared something vulnerable only to feel unseen or dismissed. And when that happens, it's tempting to shut down, to tell ourselves, see, this is why I don't open up. People don't really care. But here's the thing. Not everyone is capable of holding space for vulnerability. Not everyone is emotionally available. That doesn't mean vulnerability itself is the problem. It just means we need to be intentional about who we're vulnerable with. The key isn't to never open up. It's to open up with the right people. And let's talk about effort, because deep friendships don't just happen. They require time, energy, and intentionality. We can't expect to have close relationships if we're not willing to invest in them. And yet, so many of us treat friendship like an afterthought. We prioritize work, family, responsibilities, and assume our friendships will sustain themselves in the background. But relationships don't work that way. Connection fades when it's not nurtured. If we want real friendships, we have to actively cultivate them. That means initiating plans, following up, checking in, making space for real conversations. It means choosing connection, even when life gets busy. And here's something that might be hard to hear. Sometimes we have to be willing to be too much. A lot of us hold back in friendships because we don't want to be a burden. We don't want to ask for too much, need too much, feel like we're the only ones putting in the effort. But connection requires reciprocity. It's okay to be the one who initiates. It's okay to reach out first. It's okay to express your needs. The right people, the ones who truly value you, won't see your vulnerability as too much. They'll see it as an invitation to go deeper, to create a friendship that actually feels fulfilling rather than one that just exists on the surface. So if you're longing for deeper friendships, ask yourself this. Am I willing to be vulnerable? Am I willing to go beyond small talk, beyond convenience, beyond the fear of rejection? Because yes, vulnerability comes with risk. But it also comes with the reward of real, meaningful, life-giving connection. And that's worth every ounce of courage it takes. Let's be honest. Reaching out can feel terrifying. Whether it's reconnecting with an old friend, deepening an existing friendship, or putting yourself out there to meet new people, the first step is often the hardest. We overthink it. We analyze every possible outcome. What if they don't respond? What if they're too busy? What if they don't really want to be friends? And before we even give ourselves a chance to act, we've talked ourselves out of it. So we stay where we are, alone, longing for connection, but too afraid to take the risk. But here's the truth. If we want meaningful relationships, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. That discomfort comes from vulnerability, from stepping outside our comfort zones, from allowing ourselves to be seen. And yet we often wait for connection to just happen, as if friendship will magically appear without any effort on our part. But relationships don't work that way. They require action. They require us to take the initiative. And that means sending the text, making the call, suggesting the coffee date, even when it feels awkward, even when our inner critic tells us we'll be rejected. Because the alternative is staying stuck in loneliness, waiting for someone else to make the first move. And waiting, that's a dangerous game. And let's talk about rejection, because yes, it's a possibility. Sometimes people don't respond the way we hope. Sometimes friendships fade, or we realize that the connection isn't as strong as we thought. But here's what we forget. Rejection is not proof that we are unworthy of connection. It's simply redirection. It's an indication that this particular relationship wasn't meant to go deeper, not a reflection of our value as a person. And if we let the fear of rejection stop us from trying, we rob ourselves of the friendships that are waiting for us, the ones that will reciprocate, the ones that will show up. One of the most powerful shifts we can make is to stop seeing connection as something that just happens and start seeing it as something we actively create. That means looking for opportunities to build relationships in everyday life. It means turning casual acquaintances into deeper friendships by being intentional, by following up, by checking in, by being consistent. It means stepping into new spaces where connection can grow. Maybe that's joining a book club, a fitness class, a community group. Maybe it's volunteering, attending events, saying yes to invitations instead of making excuses. The more we put ourselves in situations where connection can happen, the more likely it will. And let's be real, building friendships as an adult takes time. Unlike childhood, where proximity and routine naturally foster relationships, adulthood requires effort. People are busy, schedules are packed, but that doesn't mean deep friendships aren't possible. It just means we have to be patient. We have to be willing to invest without expecting immediate results. We have to trust that even small moments of connection, an encouraging text, a quick check-in, an invitation to grab coffee, are planting seeds. Seeds that over time will grow into the meaningful relationships we crave. And here's something we often forget. Other people are longing for connection just as much as we are. We tell ourselves the story that everyone else already has their friends, that we're the only ones struggling with loneliness. But that is simply not true. The more conversations we have, the more we realize how many people are feeling the exact same way. And sometimes they are just as afraid to take the first step as we are. So when we reach out, when we make the first move, we're not just creating connection for ourselves, we're giving someone else permission to do the same. We're breaking the cycle of isolation, one brave step at a time. So if you're waiting for a sign to reach out, to take action, to step toward connection, this is it. Send the text, make the call, say yes to the invitation, introduce yourself. Start the conversation, because connection isn't just something we want, it's something we need. And the only way to have it is to take that first, sometimes scary, but always worthwhile step. Here's what I need you to know. You are not meant to do life alone. You were wired for connection, for deep, meaningful relationships that nourish your soul. Loneliness is not a personal failure. It's not proof that you're unworthy of friendship. It's simply a signal, a gentle, persistent reminder that you need more connection in your life. And the good news, you have the power to change that. It won't always be easy. Vulnerability will feel uncomfortable. Taking the first step will feel risky. But the alternative, staying stuck in loneliness, waiting for friendships to magically appear, will cost you far more. You deserve to be seen, to be valued, to have people in your life who truly know you. And those people, they're out there. Maybe they're waiting for you to reach out. Maybe they're longing for the same connection you are, but you'll never know unless you take the first step. So be brave. Be the one who initiates. Be the one who chooses connection, even when it feels uncertain. And when shame whispers that you're better off alone, that no one really cares, that it's too late to find your people, push back, because that's a lie. The truth, you are worthy of friendship. You always have been, and the moment you believe that is the moment everything starts to change.